When the house gets too quiet, you start to hear your own heart. The ticking clock on the wall becomes the only voice that answers you back. I sit by the window most evenings now, watching the same street I've watched for years. The children who used to run by my gate are grown now. Some wave when they pass, some don't even remember who I am. And that's all right, I suppose. Life moves on. But sometimes, when the sun sets and the sky turns that soft orange color, I catch myself thinking, when did life become so quiet? I never thought growing old would feel like this. The wrinkles, the aches, the slower steps, they never scared me. But the silence did. The silence of being forgotten. It's strange how you can live your whole life surrounded by people, your husband, your children, laughter, and voices, and then one day, you wake up and realize you're just a memory in someone else's busy day. I used to think that love was something permanent, something you give once and it stays forever. Now I know, even love fades when distance and time stretch too far apart. I don't say this with anger. Just a quiet truth, learned too late. Sometimes I whisper their names to the empty rooms, not to call them home, but just to remember how their names sounded in this house. This is my story. Not a grand one. Just the story of a mother who gave her heart, watched her family grow, and learned what it means to be left behind with memories. Growing old wasn't hard. Being forgotten was. I wasn't always this quiet woman by the window. Once upon a time, this house was alive, full of noise, full of mess, full of love. I still remember the first day we moved in. The walls smelled of fresh paint, the curtains were bright, and my husband laughed as he tried to fix the light bulb that kept flickering. We didn't have much, but we had dreams that filled the small rooms like sunlight. Then came the children. Oh, what a joy they were. 2 boys and a girl, my whole world in 3 small hands that reached for me every morning. I can still hear their laughter echoing through the hallways, the sound of feet running, the shouting over toys, the endless "Mama, Mama" that filled every hour. Back then, I used to wish for quiet moments. I used to think, if only I could have 5 minutes to myself. Now, I would give anything to hear that noise again. Life was simple. My husband worked at a local store, and I stayed home, raising the children. We didn't have fancy things, but we had warmth. We had dinner together every night. We prayed together. We celebrated small birthdays with homemade cake and laughter that could light up the darkest day. My children, they were my pride. Every morning, I woke up early, made their breakfast, ironed their clothes, and watched them run off to school. I would stand by the door until they disappeared around the corner. Sometimes, I'd stay there a little longer, just looking, just smiling, just thankful. I thought that love was enough to hold us all together forever. But life has a way of changing when you're too busy being happy. Years went by like pages turning in a book. The children grew taller, their shoes got bigger, and their laughter became rarer. My eldest son, Daniel, was always serious, quiet, focused, and determined to make something of himself. I used to tell him, "Don't forget to smile once in a while," and he'd say, "I will, Mom, after I make you proud." And he did. He worked hard, got a good job in another city, and sent money home every month. But what he didn't send was time. Then there was Lily, my only daughter. Oh, she was my heart. The kind of child who would braid my hair while talking about her dreams. She used to say, "Mama, I'll never leave you. I'll always take care of you." I believed her. But life had its own plans for her too. And then came Jacob, my youngest, my baby. Always the playful one. He was the last to leave, and the hardest goodbye. He promised to call every week, and he did, for a while. As they grew older, the house started to change. At first, it was small things. Dinner plates reduced from 5 to 4, then 3. The laundry basket wasn't as full anymore. The laughter that used to bounce off the walls now came only through the phone, short, rushed, distracted. I used to keep the phone close, waiting for their calls. When it rang, I would hurry to pick it up, pretending I wasn't waiting all day. "Hi, Mom. Sorry, just checking in. I've got to run soon." That was enough to keep my heart warm for another week. But slowly, even those calls became less frequent. People say that's how life goes. Children grow, parents age, everyone moves on. And that's true. But no one tells you how much it hurts to move on alone. I tried to keep busy. I joined a small women's group in the neighborhood, started gardening, even tried painting again. But every time I picked up the brush, I'd end up painting their faces. My husband used to tell me, "You have to let them live their lives." And I'd nod, pretending to agree. But late at night, when he'd fallen asleep, I'd walk through their old rooms, touching the old toys, the faded posters, the empty beds. I'd whisper, "It's okay, Mama's still here." When my husband passed away, the house changed again. It was just me then. The walls, once filled with life, became heavy with memories. People came, offered condolences, promised to visit. But after a few weeks, the visit stopped. The phone stopped ringing again. That's when the loneliness settled in like dust, quietly, slowly, until it was everywhere. Every morning, I'd wake up to the same sound: silence. No laughter, no footsteps, no voices calling Mom. Just the creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the old clock, and the whisper of wind through the curtains. It's funny, isn't it? You spend your whole life giving your time, your strength, your love, and in the end, you're left with the echoes of what once was. But I never blamed them. They didn't forget me out of cruelty. They just got caught up in living. Still, some nights, when the rain falls and the world feels small, I imagine them as children again, running into my arms, their little faces pressed against my chest, their laughter filling the air. And for a moment, just a brief moment, I am whole again. Time has a strange way of slipping through your fingers. Days turn into months, and months quietly become years. You don't notice it happening until you realize that the seasons have changed, and you can't remember the last time you saw your children's faces. After my husband passed, the house felt heavier. I tried to keep myself busy, cooking the meals he loved, watering the plants he planted. But there was a certain emptiness that no chore could fill. At first, my children called often. Daniel would check in every weekend, his voice firm and polite, always ending the call with, "Mom, you're taking your medicine, right?" Lily would send me pictures of her little girl, my granddaughter, and I'd stare at those photos for hours, memorizing every tiny smile. Jacob, my youngest, would call late at night. He always sounded tired, but he'd say, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll come see you soon." Those calls were my world. But slowly, they started fading away. The first time Daniel forgot my birthday, I told myself it was fine. He was busy. He had meetings, responsibilities, a family of his own now. I smiled when I saw that the day had passed without a call, pretending it didn't matter. But that night, when I blew out the candle on a single cupcake I'd baked for myself, the silence in the room pressed down on me. I whispered, "Happy birthday, dear," and laughed softly to hide the ache. A few days later, Daniel called. "Mom, I'm so sorry, work's been crazy. I completely lost track of time." I said, "That's all right, son. I understand." And I did understand. I really did. But a part of me wished he'd remembered without needing to be reminded. Lily, my daughter, used to visit every few months. She'd bring her daughter, Emma, a bright little girl with curly hair and a laugh that sounded like bells. Whenever she came, the house felt alive again. I'd cook their favorite meals, prepare the guest room, and wake up early just to make sure everything was perfect. But the visits grew shorter each time. Then, they stopped altogether. "It's hard to travel with Emma," Lily said once. "School, work, you know how it is." I nodded. Of course I knew. But I also knew that she never missed her friends' gatherings or office events. Somehow, there was always time for everything except me. Still, I didn't complain. Mothers don't, do they? We hold our pain like secrets, wrapping them carefully in patience and understanding. Jacob, my baby, he was different. He always tried. He'd call, tell me about his struggles, his new job, his dreams. I listened, proud of him, proud that he still wanted to share his life with me. Then one day, his tone changed. "Mom, I met someone," he said. "She's wonderful. You'll love her." I smiled, happy for him. But as months passed, his calls became shorter. He stopped asking how I was, stopped telling me about his day. Every conversation became about her, about their plans, about their future. One evening, I asked softly, "Will you both visit soon?" He hesitated. "We're a bit busy, Mom." Maybe later this year. I told him I'd wait. And I did. But later never came. The days began blending together. Mornings were quiet, afternoons were long, nights were endless. Sometimes I would walk around the house, opening the children's old rooms just to make sure they were still there, as if the memories might fade if I didn't check. Daniel's room was still neat, just like him. Books lined up perfectly, bed tightly made. Lily's room still had her handwriting on the wall, dream big, smile often. Jacob's room was the messiest, old posters peeling, drawers half open, dust collecting where his toys. I couldn't bring myself to change anything. It felt like erasing them would mean accepting they weren't coming back. One Sunday afternoon, I sat down with a notebook and decided to write letters to them, not to send, just to write. I wrote to Daniel first. My dear son, I'm proud of you. I know you're working hard and building a good life. Just remember to rest sometimes. I miss hearing your laugh. Then to Lily. My sweet girl, Emma must be growing so fast now. Tell her grandmother loves her. I wish I could braid her hair the way I used to braid yours. And finally, to Jacob. My little one, I hope you're happy. Love is a beautiful thing. Take care of her, but don't forget the woman who loved you first. When I finished writing, I placed the letters in a small box and kept it in my bedside drawer. I never mailed them. They were just my way of keeping the connection alive, even if it existed only on paper. One evening, I decided to call them myself. It had been months since I'd heard their voices. Daniel didn't pick up. I left a message, just checking in, hope you're eating well. Lily answered after a few rings. She sounded distracted. Mom, can I call you back later? I'm in the middle of something. She never did. Jacob answered right away. Hey, Mom. I'm so sorry I didn't call earlier. Things have been crazy. I told him it was fine, though my voice trembled a little. He said, I'll come visit soon. I promise. I said, you've been saying that for a year, Jacob. There was a silence. Then he said, I know, Mom. I'll make it happen. He didn't. A few months later, I received a family group photo on my phone. They were all together, my 3 children, their partners, and little Emma, smiling, laughing, standing in front of a restaurant I'd never been to. They looked happy. So happy. And I sat there, staring at the picture, my hands trembling. They were together. Without me. For a long time, I just looked at their faces. I tried to tell myself I was happy for them. But the truth is, a part of me broke that day. I realized something I'd never said out loud before. They didn't need me anymore. Not really. They had built their own worlds, and I was no longer part of them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the quiet house, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs on the shelves. Each picture told a story: birthdays, holidays, first days of school. Moments that felt eternal at the time, but now seemed like someone else's life. I sat by the window again, the same place where I'd once watched them walk to school, holding their lunchboxes and waving goodbye. I remembered how they used to turn back halfway down the street, just to wave one more time. They don't turn back anymore. Sometimes neighbors stop by to check on me. They say, "You must be so proud. Your children are doing so well." And I smile and say, "Yes, I am." I don't tell them that success feels different when it comes with silence. They see pictures of my children on the walls and say, "You're lucky." And I nod. I am lucky, I just wish luck didn't feel so lonely. There's a saying I once read, parents are the roots, children are the branches. The branches grow in all directions, but the roots stay in the same soil. That's true. I stayed. I grew old where I raised them. And though the roots ache sometimes, they never stop holding on. Still, some nights, I wonder if my children ever think of me, really think of me. Not out of duty, not because it's Mother's Day, but because they miss me. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. All I know is I still wait. I wait for the phone to ring. I wait for the sound of a car pulling up the driveway. I wait for footsteps at the door. And every time it's quiet again, I tell myself, maybe tomorrow. The winter that year was colder than I remembered. The mornings came late, and the nights felt endless. I had learned to live with the quiet, but that winter, the silence felt heavier, like it was pressing against my chest. I spent most of my days knitting small sweaters for Emma, even though I didn't know if they'd ever reach her. I didn't have their new addresses anymore. They moved so often, and I stopped asking. It made them uncomfortable, I think. I still sent messages, though, short ones. Good morning, Daniel. Stay warm. Kiss Emma for me, Lily. Drive safely, Jacob. Sometimes they replied, sometimes they didn't. And I told myself that was okay. One morning, I woke up feeling weaker than usual. My hands trembled when I tried to hold the kettle. I sat down, waiting for the dizziness to pass, but it didn't. I remember whispering to myself, not now. Please, not now. It was just a small fainting spell, the doctor said later. Nothing serious, he assured me. But the truth was, it scared me. Not because of the illness, I had faced worse, but because when I fell, no one knew. No one was there to help me up. It took me a long time to crawl to the phone. And when I finally reached it, my hands were shaking too much to dial. That was the moment I realized how alone I truly was. I could have been gone for days before anyone noticed. When I told Daniel about it on the phone a week later, he sounded concerned, but distant. Mom, you really should consider moving closer to us. It's not safe living alone. I smiled faintly and said, that would be lovely. But I knew he didn't mean with them. He meant near them. Close enough to visit if something happened, but not close enough to disturb their lives. Lily suggested the same. There's a nice retirement community near our place. You'd love it. They have activities, people your age, it'll be fun. I laughed softly and said, fun? For me or for you? She went quiet. I didn't want to argue. I just said, maybe one day. A few weeks later, Jacob called. He sounded cheerful. Mom, we're getting married next month. It'll be a small ceremony, but I can't wait for you to meet her. My heart leapt. Of course, I'll be there. I said, holding back tears of joy. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I bought a new dress, soft blue with little white flowers. I even got my hair done, the way he liked it when he was young. I wrapped a small gift for him, an old photo of us from his first school play, framed in simple wood. For days, I hummed while cleaning the house, too happy to feel tired. But then, the night before the wedding, I got a message. Mom, I'm so sorry. The ceremony is out of town, and things got complicated. We'll send you photos. I promise we'll visit soon. I stared at the phone for a long time. The words blurred. I read them again and again. And then I quietly placed the gift on the table and sat down. That night, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, I was. But because the tears had nowhere left to fall. They'd all been shed before. I simply sat there, whispering to myself, he must be happy. That's all that matters. The next day, I got dressed anyway. I wore the blue dress, fixed my hair, and made a small cup of tea. I looked at my reflection and said softly, you did good, Mama. You raised them to stand on their own. Then I sat in the quiet room and imagined the ceremony, the music, the laughter, the vows. I pictured Jacob smiling, the way he did when he was little. For a moment, I pretended I was there, just another invisible guest in the back row, watching with love from afar. That evening, Lily called. Mom, did you see the pictures? Didn't he look so handsome? I said yes. I said everything was beautiful. She didn't notice the silence in my voice. When we hung up, I looked at the photos again, all of them smiling, standing together, arms around one another. There was no empty chair in sight. That night, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not for the missed wedding, but for the quiet realization that I was no longer a part of their moments. I wasn't the center of their world anymore. I wasn't even a corner of it. The days after that blurred together. I stopped checking my phone so often. Stopped waiting by the window. I started talking to my husband's photograph more than I talked to anyone else. I told him about the garden, about the neighbor's new dog, about the memories that still lingered in every corner. Sometimes I caught myself asking him, did we do something wrong? But I knew we hadn't. We gave everything we could. We just didn't realize that love doesn't always return the same way. One afternoon, I took out the box of letters I'd written months before. I opened them one by one, reading my own words as if they belonged to another woman. Each letter was full of hope, the kind of hope that mothers carry quietly, even when their hearts are tired. When I finished reading them, I didn't put them back. Instead, I placed them in an envelope and wrote on it, "In case you ever come back home." Then I set it on the kitchen table. Spring came again. The trees outside began to bloom, and the air smelled of life returning. But inside, everything stayed the same. One morning, as I opened the curtains, I saw a young couple walking by with a stroller. The woman was laughing, her husband carrying bags, their baby cooing softly. I smiled, remembering those days when my arms were never empty. And then, for the first time in a long while, I whispered to myself, maybe this is how it's supposed to be. Maybe love means letting them forget you. It wasn't bitterness, just a quiet acceptance. Because I realized something that morning, they hadn't forgotten me out of cruelty. They had forgotten me out of comfort. Because they believed I was strong enough to be fine without them. They didn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface. A week later, I fainted again. This time, the neighbor found me and called an ambulance. When I woke up in the hospital, everything smelled of medicine and bleach. A nurse smiled gently and said, "You're lucky she found you in time." Lucky. It's a strange word when you realize how easily it could have been otherwise. I stayed there for a few days. The nurse checked in often. The doctor spoke kindly. But there were no familiar faces beside my bed. No hand to hold. No voice saying, "I'm here, Mom." I looked at the clock on the wall. And for the first time, I didn't wait for the phone to ring. When I was discharged, the nurse asked, "Do you have someone to pick you up?" I smiled faintly. "No, but I'll manage." I went home by cab. The house looked exactly the same, still, silent, waiting. I sat in my chair by the window, looking out at the world moving on without me. People laughing, children running, cars passing. And then I said out loud, "I think this is it." The moment I stopped waiting. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something gentler, a kind of surrender that comes when you've loved deeply, given freely, and realized that life won't always love you back the same way. That night, before going to bed, I took out the framed photo from Jacob's wedding. Everyone was smiling. I smiled back at them. And then I whispered, "Be happy, all of you." That's all I ever wanted. I turned off the light and went to sleep. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of footsteps returning. I just dreamed of peace. When I woke up the next morning, the sunlight filled the room softly. It felt different, not brighter, not warmer, just quieter. I stayed in bed for a while, listening to the birds outside my window. Their songs blended with the sound of the wind brushing against the curtains. It reminded me of mornings long ago, when my children were small and life felt full of noise, full of purpose, full of love that didn't need to be asked for. But that morning, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel anger or grief. Just a quiet understanding that life moves on, with or without you. After the hospital, my doctor suggested I get some help at home. At first, I refused. I said I could manage. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true anymore. A week later, a young woman named Aisha began visiting a few times a week. She helped with groceries, cleaned the kitchen, and always insisted I rest. She was kind not because she had to be, but because that was who she was. Sometimes she'd stay for tea after finishing her chores. She'd talk about her two boys, how they fought over toys and refused to eat vegetables. I would laugh softly and say, "That sounds just like my Daniel and Jacob when they were little." Aisha smiled. "Children never change, do they?" "No," I said, staring at my cup. "Only the seasons around them do." One afternoon, as she was leaving, she looked at me and said, "You remind me of my mother. She lives far away too. I call her every night, but it's not the same." I smiled. "Then go see her when you can. Don't wait too long." Her eyes softened. "You sound just like her." After she left, I sat for a long while, thinking about what she said. Maybe that was how love continued, through small echoes in other people's hearts. A few months passed. I started to feel stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. I still lived alone, but I didn't feel as lonely. I began to go for short walks in the park nearby. The first time, it took me a long time just to reach the bench by the pond. But sitting there, under the wide sky, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. There were other elderly people too, some reading, some feeding birds, some simply watching the world go by. I started recognizing faces, exchanging gentle nods. No one asked for my story, and I didn't offer it. We didn't need to. We understood each other in silence, a quiet companionship among those who had once been needed, once been loved, and then slowly left behind. One day, as I sat on that same bench, I saw a little girl running toward her grandmother, arms wide open, laughing as she called out, "Nana." The old woman lifted her up and kissed her cheek. The sight made my eyes sting with tears. For a moment, I felt that old ache return, the ache of missing what once was mine. But instead of sadness, I whispered, "I'm happy for you," to the stranger. Because love, even when it isn't yours anymore, is still beautiful to witness. Back at home, I started writing again. Not letters this time, just small notes to myself. Little reminders of life, of lessons learned the quiet way. Things like, love doesn't fade. It just changes form. Sometimes, letting go is another way of loving. The heart remembers even when others forget. I kept those notes in a small wooden box beside my chair. They became my company on quiet nights, small whispers of courage to keep going. Then, one Sunday morning, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was softer than I remembered. "Mom, how are you feeling? I heard about your hospital stay from Lily. Why didn't you tell me?" I smiled into the phone. "Because you were busy, my dear. And I didn't want to worry you." He sighed. "We should have been there. I should have been there." I didn't say anything for a while. Then I replied, "You were there, Daniel. In every thought, every prayer. That's enough." He was quiet. Then, with a trembling voice, he said, "We miss you, Mom. Emma asks about you all the time." My throat tightened. "She does?" "Yes," she said. "When will Grandma visit again?" I laughed softly. "Tell her Grandma's been waiting for that invitation." He promised to visit soon. And for the first time, I believed he meant it. When I hung up, I sat quietly, holding the phone in my hands. The sunlight was spilling across the table, lighting up the photograph of all three of them. I touched their faces gently and whispered, "Maybe love never really leaves. It just takes the long way back." A week later, I received a parcel in the mail. Inside was a child's drawing, messy and colorful, with the words, "I love you, Grandma," written in shaky handwriting. There was also a photo of Emma holding the picture, her smile bright and proud. Tears filled my eyes. I pressed the drawing against my chest and said softly, "I love you too, my sweet girl." It wasn't much, just paper and ink, but to me, it felt like a hand reaching across the distance. After that, the visits began, not frequent, but real. Daniel came one weekend, Lily another. Jacob sent letters, sometimes with photos. They didn't always stay long, and they didn't always understand how deep the silence had once been, but that was okay. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I had learned something in those quiet years, that love, when it's true, doesn't disappear. It simply waits for us to remember it again. One afternoon, when Daniel was helping me fix the garden fence, he looked at me and said, "Mom, how did you manage all these years alone?" I smiled faintly. By remembering that love doesn't need company to survive. It just needs a reason to stay kind. He nodded slowly. I don't think I'll ever forget that. And in that moment, I felt something gentle inside me, not pride, not relief, but peace. Because maybe that's all a mother ever truly wants, not repayment, not recognition, just to leave behind a kindness that keeps growing. The days that followed were simple and quiet again, but they felt different now. Every sunrise felt like a small gift. Every memory, a story that no longer hurt to hold. I still sat by the window every evening, tea in hand. But now, when I looked outside, I didn't wait for anyone to come home. I just watched the world and whispered, "Thank you for all of it." The good days, the lonely nights, the waiting, the tears, they had all shaped me into someone gentler, wiser, freer. That night, I opened my wooden box and took out one of the notes I had written months ago. It said, "Growing old wasn't hard, being forgotten was." I smiled at the truth of it, but I added another line below it. "But being remembered again, even for a moment, made it all worth it." I folded the note, placed it back in the box, and closed the lid softly. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful, like a story that had finally found its ending. In the quiet moments of the day, I often found myself thinking about what it really means to be a mother. When my children were small, I thought love was about giving time, energy, comfort, everything. I believed that if I gave enough, they would never forget me. But as the years passed, I learned something different. Love isn't a promise of remembrance. It's a gift you give without expecting anything in return. I used to believe that being forgotten was the cruelest thing life could do to a mother. Now, I see it differently. Being forgotten doesn't mean you were unloved. It simply means you loved so deeply that your children felt safe enough to move forward without looking back. That realization changed everything. It softened the ache inside me. It turned bitterness into peace. Sometimes I would whisper to myself, "You did your part, Mama. You carried them until they could walk, and you taught them until they could stand on their own. Now it's their turn to live." And that thought, simple as it was, brought me more comfort than any visit or phone call ever could. I started to forgive not just them, but myself. For the things I couldn't change, for the words I never said, for the years that slipped away. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it makes it lighter. It lets you breathe again. One morning in late spring, I heard a knock on the door. It was soft at first, almost hesitant. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I froze. There they were, Daniel, Lily, and little Emma standing on the porch, holding flowers. For a moment, time folded in on itself. I saw my son not as the grown man he'd become, but as the little boy who once clung to my sari and said, "Don't go, Mama." He smiled awkwardly. "We thought we'd surprise you." Behind him, Lily added, "It's been too long." And Emma ran forward, wrapping her tiny arms around my legs. "Grandma, I missed you." I knelt down, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, sunshine, and innocence. Something inside me loosened, something that had been wound tight for years. We spent the afternoon together. The house, once quiet and still, was suddenly alive again, laughter echoing off the walls, footsteps filling the hallway. I cooked for them, even though my hands trembled a little. Daniel offered to help, but I waved him away. "Let me do it," I said softly. "It feels good to cook for my family again." They stayed until the evening. Before leaving, Daniel hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, "for not being here. For everything." I touched his face gently. "There's nothing to be sorry for, my son. Life just happens. What matters is that you came home." He nodded, eyes glistening. After they left, I sat by the window again, watching their car disappear down the road. But this time, I didn't feel empty. Because I knew even if it took them years, they had found their way back. That night, after everyone left, the silence returned, but it wasn't the same kind of silence anymore. It didn't echo or ache. It simply rested in the corners of the house, peaceful and kind. I made myself a small cup of tea and sat by the window, the moonlight spilling across the floor like an old friend. I thought about my children, how much they'd grown, how far they'd come. And I thought about the years between us, the distance, the misunderstandings, the long quiet seasons. If I could go back, I wouldn't change a thing. Not the tears, not the loneliness, not even the waiting. Because every moment, even the painful ones, had led me here to this calm, tender understanding of love. I realized something simple that night. We don't love our children so they will love us back. We love them so they can go out into the world and love others. And if that means being left behind sometimes, then so be it. Because love, real love, isn't about being remembered. It's about having given enough that they can carry a piece of your heart without even knowing it. I looked at the empty chair across from me and smiled. "See?" I whispered softly to my husband's photograph. They came back. Maybe not for long, but they came back. The photograph, of course, didn't answer. But I could almost hear his voice, the one that always knew how to calm me, saying, "You did good, Mama." I closed my eyes and let the words settle deep inside me. The next morning, the sun rose soft and golden. The light poured through the window, touching everything it met, the curtains, the photos, the small vase of fading flowers. I sat there for a long while, just watching. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to look back or wonder what might have been. Because I finally understood life isn't measured by who stays beside you, but by how deeply you loved while they were here. I thought of my children again. How they had once filled my world with noise and laughter. How they had grown, stumbled, learned, and built lives of their own. And I felt proud, not of what I had done, but of who they had become. My heart was no longer heavy. It was full of memories, full of forgiveness, full of quiet gratitude. I whispered to myself, you see, growing old wasn't the hard part. It was learning to be forgotten with grace. I smiled then, not because everything was perfect, but because I had made peace with what was. The house might still be silent, the days might still be slow, but I had found something I thought I'd lost forever: contentment. Love had come back to me, not in grand gestures or loud promises, but in soft moments: a phone call, a visit, a child's drawing. Love had simply changed its form, but it had never truly left. As the clock ticked gently beside me, I whispered my final thought, one I hoped would linger long after I was gone. Being remembered is a gift, but being able to love even after being forgotten, that's grace. And with that, I closed my eyes, smiling as the sunlight warmed my face. Peacefully. Completely. Gratefully.